I'm being attacked by a tiger. Please, please, please.
You're being attacked by a tiger?
From a seasoned zookeeper's fatal mistake at Miami Metro Zoo and the devastating attack at an illegal Orlando breeding ground to a reckless cleaner's late-night blunder at Naples Zoo, Florida's history with captive tigers tells one chilling story. Let's take you through a list of some of the most viral sightings. David Marshall, Miami Metro Zoo. Our journey began on June 6, 1994, at what was then called Miami Metro Zoo, known today as Zoo Miami. This is where we encounter the tragic story of David Marshall, a senior zookeeper who was just 35 years old at the time of his death. But this wasn't some inexperienced handler who didn't know what he was doing. Quite the opposite, actually. David Marshall had an impressive 20 years of experience working with these magnificent and dangerous animals. On that fateful day in June, Marshall was performing what should have been a routine transfer operation, moving a 350-pound Bengal tiger named Lucknow from a holding area to the public viewing exhibit. Now, you need to understand that zoos implement multiple layers of safety protocols specifically for situations like this. We're talking about guillotine gates, pin locks, warning signs, the works. Every single one of these safety measures exists for a very specific reason, to prevent exactly what happened to David Marshall that day. But here's where things went horribly, catastrophically wrong. Marshall bypassed a final concrete door protocol, and investigators later theorized that this fatal decision was possibly due to his familiarity with the task. You see, when you do something hundreds or even thousands of times, complacency can set in. You start to think, I've done this 1,000 times before, what could possibly go wrong? And that's exactly the kind of thinking that can get you killed when you're dealing with apex predators. The tiger, Lucknow, didn't hesitate. The massive cat dragged Marshall into the viewing area and proceeded to maul his neck and torso. Fellow staff members only discovered his body after he failed to respond to multiple walkie-talkie checks. The zoo's communications officer at the time, a man named Ron Magel, would later describe the scene as absolutely devastating, a word that, quite frankly, doesn't even begin to capture the horror of what happened that day. Marshall suffered what medical examiners described as catastrophic neck wounds and massive blood loss, dying on site before any medical intervention could save him. The tiger, Lucknow, was subsequently euthanized following the incident. This tragedy prompted immediate internal reviews at the zoo and contributed significantly to enhanced training standards nationwide through the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, known as the AZA. David Marshall's death became a catalyst for change, but that change came at the ultimate price: his life. While Marshall's death occurred at an accredited zoo with established protocols, our next story takes us to a very different type of facility, an unlicensed breeding compound where safety standards were virtually non-existent. Orlando Breeding Compound Handler. Fast forward to March 19, 1997, and we find ourselves at an exotic cat breeding compound in Orlando. This wasn't some accredited zoo with state-of-the-art facilities and rigorous safety standards. No, this was an unlicensed breeding facility, the kind of place that operates in the shadows of proper regulation and oversight. On this particular day, a handler at the facility was in the process of repairing an enclosure. It was maintenance work that needed to be done, but the timing couldn't have been worse. There had been a storm recently, and there was a maintenance delay that had resulted in some of the structures being weakened. While the handler was working, a massive Siberian tiger, weighing approximately 400 pounds, broke through a weakened cage door. The tiger pounced immediately, doing what tigers do best, attacking with overwhelming force and precision. The handler suffered deep lacerations and crushing injuries to their lower body as the tiger's massive jaws and claws did their terrible work. But here's where the situation went from bad to potentially catastrophic. The facility lacked perimeter fencing. That means this 400-pound killing machine could have potentially escaped into the surrounding neighborhood where innocent civilians, including children, could have become victims. When authorities arrived on the scene, they were faced with an impossible situation. The tiger was still aggressive, and there was a very real fear of public escape. In the end, deputies made the decision to shoot the tiger after it charged them, eliminating the threat before it could spread beyond the facility. The handler, incredibly, survived the attack, though the injuries were absolutely severe. They suffered a broken thigh, a crushed knee, and severed arteries and veins in the leg. The victim required multiple surgeries and extended hospitalization, facing a long and painful recovery process. This case became a glaring example of the gaps that existed in Florida's pre-2000s exotic animal permitting system, spurring early calls for statewide bans on private breeding operations. Unlike the unlicensed breeding facility where our previous victim barely escaped with their life, our next story returns us to a commercial operation, though one that would prove just as deadly as any backyard compound. Ray Lowe, Savage Kingdom. On January 31st, 2001, we encounter the heartbreaking story of Ray Lowe, a 49-year-old maintenance worker at a place called Savage Kingdom Roadside Zoo in Center Hill. Ray was just trying to do his job that day, tasked with entering a tiger pen to repair a chain link partition. It was routine maintenance work, the kind of thing that needed to be done to keep the facility running properly. But here's the critical, fatal mistake. Ray entered the pen without confirming that the 550-pound Siberian tiger was properly secured in an adjacent cage. This wasn't a small tiger, folks. At 550 pounds, we're talking about an animal with the power to kill a human being in seconds. The massive cat burst through the fence, moving with the terrifying speed that only a predator of this caliber can achieve. The tiger immediately bit Ray Lowe's neck, causing massive, catastrophic trauma. The zoo owner, a man named Robert Bordy, heard the screams of his employee being mauled to death. Bordy grabbed a shotgun and made the agonizing decision to kill the tiger in an attempt to save Ray Lowe's life. But tragically, it was already too late. Ray Lowe died from the neck bites and exsanguination right there at the scene, his blood draining from his body faster than anyone could have stopped it. Savage Kingdom was operating as a breeding operation for global zoos, and following this tragedy, the facility faced intense scrutiny for what investigators found to be inadequate internal barriers. While state inspectors ultimately found no violations, they did recommend significant upgrades to the facility's safety systems. Robert Bordy, the owner who was forced to kill his own tiger to try to save his employee, later expressed profound guilt about the incident, describing the event as something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. And how could it not? The weight of that moment, hearing your employee's screams, knowing you have to kill your own animal, and still not being able to save a human life. That's the kind of psychological burden that never truly goes away. While Ray Lowe was an employee doing maintenance work at a commercial facility, our next victim was simply a friend helping out at a private compound, proving that danger lurks wherever these predators are kept, regardless of the relationship between the human and the facility owner. Carol Pistilli, Steve Sipek's compound. On February 3, 2002, we meet Carol Pistilli, a 56-year-old woman who was simply trying to help out a friend. That friend was Steve Sipek, a former actor who had been known as Tarzan in various low-budget films. Sipek had a private animal compound in Loxahatchee, and Carol was there helping to clean the property in preparation for a documentary shoot. Now, Sipek's compound wasn't just home to one big cat. The property housed multiple big cats, including lions, and it had what can only be described as a history of lax security measures. This wasn't a professional facility with proper safety protocols. This was a private owner's compound, and the rules were, shall we say, more relaxed than they should have been. While helping clean, Carol unknowingly entered an enclosure that housed Sipek's 750-pound declawed Bengal tiger named Bobo. Now, you might be thinking, well, the tiger was declawed, so how bad could it really be? Let me tell you, a 750-pound tiger doesn't need claws to kill you. Those jaws are more than enough to crush a human skull like it's an eggshell, and that's exactly what almost happened to Carol. The tiger bit her head during what appeared to be play behavior, fracturing her skull. Let me repeat that. The tiger fractured her skull with its bite. The injuries were critical, severe head trauma that required weeks of hospitalization and resulted in lasting cognitive effects. But Carol survived, and in a twist that speaks to the complex relationship humans have with these animals, she later described the attack as a freak accident, but also became an advocate, criticizing private ownership of exotic animals. And here's a chilling postscript to this story. Bobo, the tiger that attacked Carol, escaped from the compound 2 years later in 2004 and was subsequently shot by deputies. The cycle of tragedy continued. While Carol Pistilli was an unpaid friend helping at a private compound, our next victim was actually the owner of his own exotic animal business, demonstrating that even those who profit from keeping these creatures aren't immune to their deadly power. Lancelot Coleman, Sir Lance a Lot. September 12, 2006, brings us to the story of Lancelot Coleman, who also went by the name Lance Ramos. Coleman was a former circus performer who had established an animal business called Sir Lance a Lot in Balm, Florida. On this particular day, Coleman was performing what should have been routine maintenance, cleaning the cage of his 250-pound female Bengal tiger named Ruler during a regular shift. But accidents happen in the blink of an eye when you're dealing with animals that are hardwired by millions of years of evolution reputation to be killing machines. Coleman tripped while inside the cage, and that sudden, unexpected movement startled Ruler. The tiger's response was instinctive and immediate. Ruler swatted at Coleman, her claws slashing his face and arm with the kind of force that only a big cat can generate. Now, Coleman's compound was valued at $35,000 and housed multiple cats that he used for exhibitions, so he wasn't some amateur who didn't know what he was doing. He had experience with these animals. But experience doesn't make you immune to injury when you're dealing with predators. The FWC sent Lieutenant Steve Delacour to investigate the incident. While the investigation found no major violations, Delacour did note concerns about overcrowding risks at the facility. Coleman's injuries, while serious, were not life-threatening. He suffered a split lip that required 25 stitches and an arm laceration that went all the way to the bone, requiring 5 stitches and a drainage tube. Remarkably, he was treated and released the same day. But this incident was just the beginning of Coleman's troubles with authorities. This event preceded broader scrutiny of Ramos's unlicensed operations, which eventually led to a 2013 FWC order requiring him to relocate 16 Hawthorne Corporation tigers from his property. Sometimes it takes an attack to shine a light on operations that probably shouldn't have been operating in the first place. While Coleman survived his encounter at a private exhibition facility, our next story takes us back to an accredited zoo, where even trained professionals working with proper safety equipment aren't always protected from these predators' lightning-fast reflexes. Palm Beach Zoo keeper. February 11, 2008, takes us to the Palm Beach Zoo in West Palm Beach, where an experienced keeper who had been working with tigers for nearly 2 years was performing what had become a routine task, hand-feeding a Sumatran tiger named Mata. Now, you might be wondering, why would anyone hand-feed a tiger through cage bars? It's a valid question, and as it turns out, it's a question that should have been asked much more seriously before this incident occurred. The keeper was hand-feeding Mata through the cage bars when the tiger bit her finger, severing nerves and bone. This wasn't just a little nip or a minor scratch. We're talking about a deep finger bite that went all the way to the bone, causing severe damage that required surgery and resulted in months of rehabilitation before the keeper could achieve full recovery. The investigation that followed was revealing in its findings. The FWC flagged the zoo's practice of direct feeding as hazardous and recommended alternatives like using long-handled tongs instead of putting body parts anywhere near those powerful jaws. This was technically a non-fatal event, and no members of the public were involved, but it exposed what could only be described as routine risks that existed even in accredited facilities that were supposed to be following the highest safety standards. The keeper was ultimately deemed at fault for their proximity to the animal during feeding, which might seem harsh, but when you're dealing with animals that can kill you, there's simply no room for taking shortcuts or bending the rules. This non-fatal incident led to significant protocol overhauls at the facility, including the implementation of mandatory barriers between keepers and big cats during feeding times. Unfortunately, as we'll see in our next story, these protocol changes weren't enough to prevent an even more tragic incident at the same zoo just 8 years later. But while this 2008 incident resulted in a relatively minor injury during a feeding procedure, what happened at the very same Palm Beach Zoo in 2016 would be catastrophically different. A fatal mauling that would shake the zoological community to its core and prove that even the most experienced tiger whisperers are never truly safe. Stacy Conweiser, Palm Beach Zoo. April 15, 2016. This is a date that will forever be remembered as one of the darkest days in the history of the Palm Beach Zoo in West Palm Beach. This is where we meet Stacy Conweiser, a 38-year-old lead tiger keeper who had earned the nickname Tiger Whisperer due to her exceptional skill and connection with the zoo's Malayan tigers. Stacy had been working with these magnificent animals for over 3 years, and by all accounts, she was extraordinarily good at her job. On this particular afternoon, she was preparing for a 2 p.m. demonstration called Tiger Talk, an educational program designed to teach visitors about these incredible creatures. But to prepare for this demonstration, Stacy made a fatal decision. She entered an off-limits night house, essentially the tiger's bedroom area, completely alone. Here's what makes this so tragic. Stacy unlocked 2 padlocks to gain entry, which was a direct violation of facility policy that explicitly prohibited entry when tigers had access to that space. The tiger in question was a 13-year-old, 420-pound male Malayan tiger named Haiti, who had been transferred from Zoo Miami in 2015 2015. What happened next was swift and brutal. Haiti attacked Stacy, mauling her and dragging her body approximately 20 feet. But here's something that speaks to Stacy's incredible courage and presence of mind, even in the face of certain death. She managed to radio for help, calling out "Code Red Tiger" to alert her colleagues that something had gone horribly wrong.
The decision to use a tranquilizer dart versus shooting the animal was also made during a crisis situation.
But here's where the situation becomes even more heartbreaking. Responders had to wait 11 agonizing minutes to tranquilize Hattie because they feared a ricochet from gunfire in the confined space, and it took a total of 17 minutes before EMS personnel could safely access Stacy. 17 minutes. In those precious minutes, Stacy's life ebbed away. Stacy's husband, Jeremy Conweiser, was also a keeper at the zoo, and you can only imagine the devastation he experienced. The zoo later honored Stacy's memory with a memorial habitat dedication. The autopsy revealed the horrific nature of her injuries. Death resulted from a fractured spine, lacerated jugular vein, severe neck bites, and massive blood loss at St. Mary's Medical Center. The investigations that followed by both OSHA and the FWC cited human error as the primary cause, but also praised the facility's overall safety protocols. But no amount of protocol can bring back Stacy Conweiser, a passionate conservationist who died doing what she loved. While Stacy Conweiser's death occurred in the private confines of a zoo's back-of-house area, our next incident would unfold in front of a horrified audience of schoolchildren, bringing the dangers of captive tigers into shocking public view. Vladimir Dmitriev, Pensacola Interstate Fair. Just 6 months after the tragic death of Stacy Conweiser on October 25, 2016, we find ourselves at the Pensacola Interstate Fair in Pensacola, not Tampa, as was initially reported in some accounts, where another tiger attack would occur, this time during a public performance. A trainer named Vladimir Dmitriev was in the middle of a performance when he was suddenly dragged and scratched by a 500-pound Bengal tiger named Caesar while entering the ring. What makes this incident particularly disturbing is that this wasn't happening in some secluded area of a zoo or private facility. This was happening during a school field trip performance with children watching. Video footage captured by a student shows the massive cat lunging mid-act, a terrifying moment that highlighted the incredible stresses that public exhibitions place on these wild animals. Think about it from the tiger's perspective. Loud noises, bright lights, crowds of people being forced to perform tricks that have nothing to do with their natural behavior. It's a recipe for disaster. Thankfully, no children were harmed during this incident, but you have to wonder about the psychological impact of watching a massive tiger attack a human being right in front of your eyes when you're just a kid on a school field trip. The fair's animal show, which was part of a traveling circus, paused briefly after the attack. Dmitriev's injuries, while serious, were not life-threatening. He suffered scratches and bruises to his arms and torso and was hospitalized overnight before being released with minor treatment. But this incident became much bigger than just one trainer's injuries. It fueled anti-exploitation campaigns and contributed significantly to Florida's decision to implement a circus ban in 2018. Sometimes it takes visible public incidents like this one to galvanize public opinion and create real change in legislation. While Dmitriev was a professional trainer attacked during a commercial performance meant to entertain crowds, our next victim worked at what many would consider the most ethical type of facility possible, a rescue sanctuary dedicated to ending the very exploitation that put tigers in circuses in the first place. Candy Causa, Big Cat Rescue. December 3, 2020 brings us to one of the most ironic and unexpected locations for a tiger attack, Big Cat Rescue Sanctuary in Tampa. If you've watched the Netflix documentary series Tiger King, you're probably familiar with this facility and its founder, Carol Baskin. Big Cat Rescue positions itself as a sanctuary dedicated to ending big cat captivity and abuse, so a serious attack happening here sent shockwaves through the exotic animal community. The victim was Candy Causa, a 61-year-old veteran volunteer who had been working at the sanctuary for 5 years. 5 years of experience working with these animals. She knew the protocols, she knew the dangers, and yet, in one moment of either carelessness or desperation to complete a task, everything went wrong. Candy reached into a 3-year-old male Bengal tiger named Kimber's enclosure to unclip a feeding door, which was a direct violation of the sanctuary's strict no body parts in cage protocol. Now, Kimber had his own traumatic history. He had been rescued from a Guatemalan circus in 2018, so he had every reason to be skittish and reactive around around humans. When Candy's arm entered the enclosure amid the food stimulus, Kimber's predatory instincts kicked in immediately. The tiger grabbed her arm and nearly severed it at the shoulder, causing catastrophic damage. Staff members rushed to apply tourniquets in a desperate attempt to stop the massive blood loss, and remarkably, Candy remained conscious through much of this ordeal. What happened next speaks volumes about Candy's character and her understanding of animal behavior. Even as she was being sedated and prepared for transport to the hospital, she requested that no punishment be given to Kimber. She understood that the tiger was simply being a tiger, responding to instinct and stimulus in the way that millions of years of evolution had programmed him to respond. The sanctuary, made famous by its appearance in the Netflix documentary Tiger King, quarantined Kimber for 30 days following the attack, which is standard protocol. Candy's injuries were severe. Her arm was broken in 3 places, with severe shoulder damage and deep puncture wounds. She underwent multiple surgeries and months of rehabilitation, but incredibly, she eventually regained full mobility of her arm. The FWC investigation that followed emphasized what many saw as training gaps at the facility. Here was a sanctuary that had positioned itself as a leader in big cat welfare, yet one of their veteran volunteers had violated a fundamental safety protocol. It raised uncomfortable questions about whether the facility's training and oversight were as robust as they needed to be. While Candy Cowser was a trained volunteer who at least understood the risks she was taking by violating protocol, our final story involves someone with absolutely no business being anywhere near a tiger enclosure, a contract cleaner whose reckless decision after hours would result in the death of a critically endangered animal. River Rosenquist, Naples Zoo. Our final story takes us to December 29, 2021, at the Naples Zoo at Caribbean Gardens in Naples. This incident is different from all the others we've discussed because it wasn't a zookeeper, it wasn't a trainer, and it wasn't even a volunteer at the facility. River Rosenquist was a 26-year-old contract cleaner who made a series of catastrophically bad decisions that would result in the death of a critically endangered tiger and nearly cost him his own life. This happened after hours when the zoo was closed to the public. Rosenquist jumped a safety barrier that was clearly marked and designed specifically to keep people at a safe distance from the tiger enclosure. But that wasn't enough for him. After jumping the outer barrier, he stuck his arm through the inner fencing to either pet or something. Echo did what any tiger would do in that situation. He clamped down on Rosenquist's arm with his powerful jaws, dragging him against the bars and mangling his arm with terrifying efficiency. When deputies arrived on the scene, they were faced with an impossible situation. A man's arm was trapped in a tiger's mouth, and there was no way to safely separate them.
I'm being attacked by a tiger. Please.
You're being attacked by a tiger?
The body cam footage that was later released captured Rosenquist's screams of, "Please help me," as deputies desperately tried to free him. They tried kicking the tiger. They tried everything they could think of to make the animal release its grip, but nothing worked. Finally, deputies made the agonizing decision to shoot Echo in an attempt to save Rosenquist's life. The tiger was shot, and the zoo subsequently euthanized Echo following the shooting. This wasn't just any tiger. Echo was a critically endangered Malayan tiger, serving as an ambassador animal for his species. His death was a conservation tragedy that never should have happened. Rosenquist's injuries were severe. Both arms were punctured to the bone, and he suffered massive blood loss. He was airlifted to a hospital where he underwent an 8-hour surgery. He nearly lost his arm, but survived with extensive rehabilitation. Rosenquist faced potential charges for his unauthorized actions, and rightfully so. His reckless decision cost a critically endangered animal its life. The body cam video from this incident went viral, leading to FWC audits of zoo access controls throughout the state. It became a high-profile case study in what not to do around big cats and sparked renewed conversations about public safety measures at zoological facilities. The tragedy of Echo's death served as a stark reminder that barriers and safety protocols aren't just suggestions, they're life and death necessities that exist to protect both humans and these magnificent animals. Thank you for watching. Check out other boxes on the screen.